Welcome to Dark Truth. In a world where peace feels fragile and power is shifting faster than ever, one question hangs in the air. Is World War III already in motion? Across continents, alliances are forming, economies are collapsing, and silent wars are being fought in cyberspace, in the skies, and in the shadows. Governments deny it. Media distracts from it. But behind the noise, something bigger is moving. Something that could reshape the world forever. This is not just another story about war. It's about the systems that create it, the hands that profit from it, and the lies that keep it hidden. From Ukraine to Gaza, from Washington to Beijing, from energy markets to artificial intelligence. Every event, every decision, and every silence leads to one unsettling possibility: that the next global conflict has already begun. We just haven't realized it yet. So sit back. Forget what you've been told. Because in the next 2 hours, we're not following headlines. We're following truth. Welcome to the coming storm. Is World War III already in motion? The unseen beginning. Before every great war, there's a moment when everything feels strangely calm. A fragile stillness settles across nations, and people convince themselves that peace will last forever. But history has shown, time and again, that peace is only the quiet before the storm. In the early decades of the 21st century, the world appeared connected like never before. Globalization promised unity, the internet erased borders, and technology made life faster, easier, and more dependent on unseen systems. Behind this illusion of progress, however, something darker was forming, a web of mistrust, economic tension, and political ambition that would quietly erode the very foundations of global peace. To understand how the next world war might already be in motion, we must look back at how the current order was built. After the Second World War ended in 1945, the world was divided not only by ideology, but by influence. The United States emerged as the dominant power, while the Soviet Union became its greatest rival. What followed was not peace, it was containment. A global standoff where both sides fought wars through others, built weapons they hoped never to use, and spread propaganda that reached every classroom, every newspaper, and every home. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many believed the danger had passed. Western leaders declared victory for democracy. The world celebrated what they called the end of history. But power never disappears. It only changes hands. While the West grew confident, even arrogant, other nations watched and learned. They saw how America expanded its influence through military bases, trade deals, and digital control. They saw how the global economy could be used as a weapon, and they began preparing to fight back, not with tanks and soldiers, but with patience and planning. In the shadows of prosperity, new alliances were quietly born. China began rising, not through open warfare, but through manufacturing, technology, and silent infiltration of global markets. Russia rebuilt its strength, waiting for the right moment to remind the world it had never truly fallen. And smaller nations, long manipulated by superpowers, started forming their own networks, regional, religious, and ideological, each driven by resentment and ambition. For decades, the signs of the coming conflict were dismissed as regional instability. Trade disputes, cyber attacks, proxy wars, each seen as isolated. But they were not isolated. They were connected threads in a much larger design, one that now stretches across every continent. Every generation believes their time is different, that humanity has learned from its mistakes. But history's lesson is cruelly consistent. Empires collapse from within long before enemies strike from without. And today, the cracks are visible everywhere. In politics, in culture, in the economy, in truth itself. We live in a world where information travels faster than understanding, where outrage replaces dialogue, and truth competes with noise. Governments, corporations, and individuals all fight for attention. Not wisdom, not justice, just attention. And while the public argues online, decisions that shape the future are made in silence. In 2008, the global financial crash shook the world's faith in the Western system. Millions lost their homes, their savings, and their trust. Meanwhile, nations like China saw an opportunity to offer an alternative model: strict control, centralized power, efficiency over freedom. Many laughed at it then. Few are laughing now. By the 2010s, cyber warfare had become a reality. Countries were no longer attacking military bases. They were attacking minds, networks, and data. Elections were influenced, pipelines hacked, markets manipulated. Power had moved online, invisible yet absolute. And now, in the 2020s, the tension that began decades ago is approaching its critical point. Three major fronts are forming: economic, ideological, and digital, and all are converging. No nation truly trusts another. All are arming, directly or indirectly, for what they refuse to name. The term World War III sounds dramatic until you look closely. War is no longer declared with speeches. It begins through chain reactions. A cyber attack here, a drone strike there, an economic sanction that topples a government, a false flag that triggers retaliation. Each event looks small, but together they form a storm system too large to stop. Look around. Inflation, supply chain collapse, energy crises, political division, and disinformation. They are not coincidences. They are symptoms of a world order collapsing under its own weight. The people of Earth sense something is wrong. They feel the anxiety, but can't explain it. Governments speak of unity while preparing for conflict. Media floods the airwaves with distraction, while the gears of militarization grind louder every day. And through it all, one truth echoes from history's pages. No empire in decline has ever stepped aside peacefully. Each clings to its power until the collapse consumes it and the world around it. So here we stand, on the edge once more. No mushroom clouds, no global announcements, just a series of quiet moves, calculated choices, and desperate defenses. The coming storm doesn't begin with thunder. It begins with silence. And the silence has already begun. The death of global peace. For nearly 80 years, humanity lived under a fragile illusion that global peace was secured. The United Nations existed, alliances were formed, treaties were signed, and leaders assured their citizens that a third world war was impossible. But peace was not achieved, it was managed. It wasn't born from trust or compassion, but from fear and balance. The world didn't find peace. It found containment. After the Second World War, the victors drew invisible lines on maps and declared stability. The West called it democracy. The East called it resistance. But what they really built was a system of control, economic, political, and psychological, that kept the world quiet while powerful nations carved it up piece by piece. Every piece that depends on fear will one day break. And now, that fear has shifted. During the Cold War, the world was divided by ideology: capitalism versus communism, freedom versus control. Today, the lines are no longer clear. It's not East versus West anymore. It's power versus everyone else. The Western powers believed globalization would unite the planet under one system: open markets, shared values, interconnected economies. For a while it worked. Trade flowed, borders opened, and billions were lifted out of poverty. But the same system that built this prosperity also built dependency. When a single system controls all resources, all trade, and all finance, whoever commands that system commands the world. The dollar became the lifeblood of global commerce. U.S. influence spread through loans, sanctions, and military protection disguised as diplomacy. NATO expanded further east. Meanwhile, Russia watched as former allies turned away, and China watched how America enforced obedience without ever firing a shot. Global peace became a brand, a political slogan to justify endless intervention. Under its banner, wars were fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. Each claimed to preserve peace, yet each left nations shattered and millions displaced. Peace had become profitable. The same countries selling the idea of freedom were also selling the weapons used to destroy it. By the 2010s, the system began to strain. The Arab Spring ignited across the Middle East, exposing decades of repression supported by Western powers. Economic crashes shook Europe. America's political divide deepened into chaos. The dream of a united world started to crumble. As trust eroded, new alliances formed, often quietly, without headlines. Russia began to rebuild its sphere of influence through energy control and military pressure. China extended its reach across Africa, Asia, and South America, using loans and infrastructure as silent weapons. Iran, North Korea, and Turkey pushed against Western influence, each for their own survival. The United Nations, once a symbol of global unity, became paralyzed by politics. Its resolutions ignored, its warnings dismissed, its authority hollow. When powerful nations act without consequence, institutions built on fairness become irrelevant. And in that void of accountability, a new world began to take shape, one without rules, one where might once again defines right. Look closely, and you'll see the pieces shifting. China's Belt and Road Initiative is more than an economic project. It's a geopolitical network that ties dozens of nations to Beijing's control. Russia's reemergence in Eastern Europe is not about reclaiming lost land. It's about reclaiming lost influence. And Western sanctions, once a tool of dominance, are losing their bite as alternative systems rise. The so-called peace that followed World War II was held together by one thing: fear of total destruction. Nuclear weapons kept nations cautious. Mutually assured destruction became the unspoken peacekeeper. But now, technology has outpaced deterrence. Cyber attacks, biological warfare, artificial intelligence. These don't require nuclear bombs. They require access, code, and intent. And intent, once buried beneath diplomacy, is beginning to surface. Every nation claims it wants peace, but peace built on inequality cannot last. The global economy favors the few. The powerful nations write the rules. The weaker ones pay the price. And every empire, blinded by arrogance, forgets that control breeds rebellion. History remembers this pattern well. Before World War I, Europe was deeply interconnected: trade, politics, even royal bloodlines. Leaders believed war was impossible because everyone depended on everyone else. Yet one assassination was enough to collapse that illusion overnight. The same illusion exists today, but this time the system is global. If it breaks, everything breaks with it. In our time, peace has become a myth told to keep the public calm. Behind every summit and handshake lies distrust. Every promise of stability hides preparation for chaos. Governments talk of defense budgets that reach into the trillions. Military bases multiply. Missiles are tested. AI-controlled drones patrol the skies. Peace is no longer pursued. It's performed. And while the world watches entertainment, elections, and endless distraction, the machinery of war continues to turn, unseen, uninterrupted, unstoppable. The death of global peace didn't happen in a single moment. It's been dying for years, slowly, quietly, beneath the noise of politics and progress. It died when truth became propaganda. It died when freedom became selective. It died when profit outweighed humanity. Now, we stand in a world where every nation prepares for war while pretending it doesn't exist. Each claims to defend peace, yet every action fuels the storm ahead. The truth is simple: global peace was never real. It was an illusion, and illusions always fade. What replaces it is uncertainty and the faint sound of thunder on the horizon. The economic powder keg. War doesn't always begin with soldiers crossing borders. Sometimes it starts with numbers on a screen, with currencies collapsing, prices rising, and nations drowning in debt. Before the first shot is ever fired, economies crumble, and that's when desperation begins to rule. Today, the world economy is more connected than at any point in history, yet more unstable than it has been in decades. A single event on one continent now sends shockwaves through every other. A virus outbreak can crash markets in minutes. A blocked trade route can paralyze entire industries. A single cyber attack can erase billions in value overnight. The global system, once built for cooperation, has become a weapon of control. To understand how close we are to collapse, we need to look back. After the 2008 financial crisis, world governments printed trillions to keep economies afloat. That money didn't disappear, it concentrated. It flowed into corporations, stock markets, and the hands of a few, while ordinary citizens were left with inflation, debt, and instability. The rich became richer. The poor became poorer. And beneath it all, the trust that kept the system alive began to erode. For years, central banks manipulated interest rates to maintain an illusion of growth. Nations borrowed more, spent more, and promised more, all built on paper money backed by nothing but confidence. But confidence is fragile, and when faith in a currency breaks, the entire structure follows. Look closely, and you can see the cracks forming. In Europe, economic stagnation has fueled political extremism. In America, national debt has surpassed levels once thought impossible. In Africa and Asia, foreign loans from powerful nations have created silent colonies, countries trapped by debt they can never repay. Meanwhile, inflation eats away at savings, food prices soar, and ordinary people are left wondering why everything costs more while their pay remains the same. But this isn't just mismanagement. It's a new kind of warfare. Economic war. A conflict where the battlefield is the global market and the casualties are invisible. Sanctions have become the modern version of siege warfare. One country restricts trade, another retaliates, and millions of innocent people suffer as their currencies collapse. Energy is used as leverage. Grain, fuel, and medicine become tools of control. And while the public blames their governments, the real struggle happens far above them, between the architects of finance and power. In this war, banks and corporations act like armies. They don't invade, they acquire. They don't destroy, they absorb. When a country can't repay its loans, its resources are seized, its policies are dictated, and its sovereignty fades. This is the quiet conquest of the modern age. China's Belt and Road Initiative is one of the most striking examples. Under the promise of development, China lends billions to nations in need of infrastructure. Ports, railways, power plants, all built with Chinese loans, Chinese workers, and Chinese terms. When those countries can't pay, China gains control of their assets, their land, and sometimes even their votes in global institutions. It's colonization without war, a strategy that reshapes the world map without firing a bullet. The United States, for its part, uses the dollar as its ultimate weapon. Most international trade is conducted in dollars, giving Washington the power to freeze assets, block transactions, and isolate entire nations. Countries like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia have all felt the weight of this financial dominance. But each sanction pushes them closer together, united not by friendship, but by survival. And that unity is beginning to reshape the global order. In response, nations are slowly breaking away from the dollar's control. China and Russia trade in their own currencies. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are exploring new systems that bypass Western banks entirely. For the first time since World War II, America's financial supremacy faces a real challenge. And here lies the danger. When a dominant empire feels its control slipping, it rarely surrenders peacefully. Throughout history, collapsing economies have always been followed by conflict. The Great Depression in the 1930s led directly to World War II. Economic despair breeds nationalism, extremism, and the hunger for enemies to blame. We see it happening again. Populist movements rise, promising to restore pride and power. Governments spend more on weapons than on welfare. And when the system finally buckles, they will point outward to another nation, another people, as the cause of the pain. It's a script as old as civilization itself. But this time, the stakes are global. If the dollar falls, the world falls with it. If China's economy implodes, supply chains shatter. If Europe fractures under debt, migration, and unrest, chaos spreads. The world economy has become a house of cards, built on borrowed time and borrowed money. Behind every currency lies a promise that it represents value, work, stability. But what happens when that promise is broken? When the numbers on the screen no longer match the reality in people's lives? Then people lose faith not only in their leaders, but in the system itself. And when faith dies, revolution follows. Economists call it correction. Historians call it collapse. But in truth, it is the oldest pattern of all, the fall of empires by economic decay. It doesn't matter how strong your army is when your people can't afford to eat. It doesn't matter how powerful your government is when your money means nothing. Every nation, at some point, faces the same truth. You cannot print your way out of reality. The economic powder keg of our time is already lit. Every inflation spike, every interest rate hike, every debt crisis adds more fuel. And when it finally explodes, it won't be a local collapse. It will be global. Jobs will vanish, currencies will spiral, and governments will scramble to restore order by any means necessary. And that's when history repeats. Economic crisis becomes political crisis. Political crisis becomes social unrest. And social unrest becomes war. This is how great conflicts begin. Not with declarations, but with desperation. Not with ambition, but with survival. Because when the money dies, peace dies with it. Ukraine, the battlefield of empires. For centuries, Ukraine has been more than a nation. It has been a crossroads, a place where empires meet, collide, and fall. The battle for Ukraine is not just about territory. It's about history, identity, and control of the future. To understand today's war, you have to go back, not a decade, but 1,000 years. The roots of both Russia and Ukraine lie in the same ancient kingdom, Kievan Rus. It was from Kiev that Eastern Slavic civilization began, long before Moscow even existed. But history rarely stays still. Mongol invasions, Polish-Lithuanian rule, and the rise of the Russian Empire changed everything. Ukraine became a land divided between East and West, between language and culture, between independence and influence. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence. For the first time in centuries, it had the chance to define itself, free from Moscow's grip. But freedom came with a price. The new nation was poor, fragile, and caught between two giants, Russia to the east and the west, NATO and the European Union to the west. For Russia, Ukraine was never just another neighbor. It was the heart of its history, the breadbasket of its economy, and the gateway to the West. Losing Ukraine meant losing power, losing pride, and losing the buffer that protected Russia from Europe for centuries. For the West, Ukraine represented something else, a chance to weaken Moscow's influence and expand its own. The U.S. and its allies saw Ukraine as a bridge for democracy and free markets. But to the Kremlin, that bridge looked like a threat. Each side spoke of freedom and sovereignty, but behind those words lay a struggle for dominance. The real turning point came in 2014, when protests erupted in Kyiv against a pro-Russian government. The world watched as Ukraine's people took to the streets demanding change. They wanted closer ties to Europe, and they were willing to risk everything for it. But revolutions rarely end cleanly. Within months, Russia annexed Crimea, claiming it as historically theirs. The world condemned the act, but the lines had been drawn. The Donbass region in eastern Ukraine soon became a war zone. A brutal, grinding conflict between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists. It was the beginning of a war that would slowly draw the entire world into its orbit. By 2022, the situation exploded. Russia launched a full-scale invasion, believing the world would hesitate, that NATO would argue, and Europe would stay divided. They were wrong. For the first time since World War II, Europe united against a single aggressor. Sanctions, weapons, aid, the entire West moved in coordination. But beneath that unity was fear. Fear of escalation, fear of nuclear confrontation, fear that the line between defense and destruction was becoming too thin to see. Ukraine became a testing ground for modern warfare. Drones replaced soldiers in the sky. Cyber attacks crippled communication systems. Information wars raged across social media. And every image, every headline became a weapon, not just against soldiers, but against the minds of millions watching. But who truly benefits from this endless war? For Ukraine, the price is unthinkable. Lives lost, cities destroyed, generations scarred. For Russia, the cost is isolation, sanctions, and a bleeding economy. Yet for the world's weapons manufacturers, energy traders, and political strategists, this war is profit and power. Behind every headline about freedom or defense, there are contracts, deals, and calculations. Each shipment of weapons means billions for someone. Each destroyed city means a future market for reconstruction. The longer the war continues, the more the global economy adapts to it, until war itself becomes normal. And that's the darkest truth of all. Ukraine's suffering has become a business, a geopolitical chessboard where each move is made not for peace, but for leverage. Russia frames its actions as defense against NATO expansion. The West frames its actions as defense of democracy. But both narratives hide the same reality. This is a proxy war, a battle fought indirectly between the world's great powers, using Ukraine as the field and its people as the pieces. The danger is not just what happens inside Ukraine, it's what happens next. Every sanction, every weapon delivery, every declaration pushes the boundary of restraint further. The longer this war drags on, the more the world edges towards something irreversible. History shows us that major wars rarely stay contained. They spread through alliances, through accidents, through pride. And when global powers are already locked in competition, one spark can ignite a chain reaction. The First World War began not with strategy, but with a single assassination. The second began with the invasion of a smaller neighbor. And the third, if it comes, may begin here in Ukraine, where empires old and new are fighting not just for land, but for the shape of the world that follows. For now, the world watches, divided between hope and fear. But every day the war continues, the balance tilts. The weapons grow deadlier, the rhetoric sharper, and the distance between limited conflict and total war becomes smaller. What began as a regional war may yet end as something much greater and far more dangerous. The Asian front, China's silent advance. While Europe burns in open conflict, another kind of war is unfolding in Asia, one that doesn't rely on bombs or tanks, but on patience, precision, and power. China is not rushing toward war. It's building one, brick by brick, policy by policy, decade by decade. For years, the world saw China as an economic miracle, a country that rose from poverty to global dominance in a single generation. Factories hummed, ports overflowed, and the West grew rich on cheap labor and endless exports. But while the world celebrated globalization, China studied it, learned its weaknesses, and began quietly rewriting the rules. Today, China's reach stretches across continents. Through trade deals, digital surveillance, and infrastructure projects, it has built influence not by invasion, but by investment. Ports in Africa, railways in Europe, military bases near vital shipping routes, all connected by one grand vision, the Belt and Road Initiative. To the world, it looks like development. To strategists, it looks like encirclement. Every empire seeks control of trade. In ancient times, it was the Silk Road. Today, it's the sea lanes that move oil, gas, and data. Whoever controls those routes controls the world economy. And China is positioning itself to do exactly that. The South China Sea, a stretch of ocean bordered by multiple nations, has become the focal point. Beneath its waters lie vast reserves of oil and natural gas. Above it pass shipping lanes that carry nearly one-third of all global trade. China claims almost all of it. To enforce that claim, it has built artificial islands, complete with airstrips, radar systems, and missile defenses. The world calls them illegal. China calls them home. American warships patrol nearby, promising to protect freedom of navigation. Chinese vessels shadow them, inch for inch, wave for wave. Every close call risks confrontation. Every maneuver tests the other's resolve. The ocean, once a symbol of distance, has become a spark waiting to ignite. But China's ambitions extend far beyond the sea. Through economic influence, it is shaping governments from Africa to Latin America. Loans, technology, and partnerships create a network of dependency and loyalty. Countries that accept Chinese investment often find themselves unable to resist its demands later. Ports become military assets. Telecom companies become surveillance tools. And each connection tightens the net. While Western powers chase short-term political goals, China plays the long game. Its leadership thinks not in years, but in generations. It invests in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and space infrastructure with one goal: to ensure that the 21st century belongs to Beijing. At the heart of this strategy lies Taiwan, the most dangerous flashpoint in Asia. A small island, democratic and prosperous, sitting just off China's coast. Beijing claims it as part of its territory. The people of Taiwan, however, see themselves as free. The United States, bound by decades of strategic ambiguity, supports Taiwan's defense but stops short of formal recognition. This fragile balance has kept peace for decades, but peace built on ambiguity cannot last forever. Every military analyst knows the truth. If China moves to take Taiwan, the world will face its greatest crisis in generations. Not only because of alliances or ideology, but because of what Taiwan represents. It produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors, the microchips that power everything from smartphones to fighter jets. Whoever controls Taiwan controls the backbone of the global economy. That's why the world watches the Taiwan Strait like a loaded gun. Chinese warplanes cross into Taiwanese airspace almost daily. American ships sail nearby. Each side claims restraint, but each is preparing for the worst. Simulations suggest that any invasion would be catastrophic for both sides. Thousands of ships destroyed, millions of lives disrupted, and global markets in freefall. Yet the possibility grows stronger every year. China doesn't need to fire first to win. By tightening economic dependence, expanding its influence, and testing the world's patience, it is slowly redrawing the global balance of power. The Western order, built on U.S. dominance, is being replaced by something new, something uncertain. A world with two centers of gravity, two competing systems, and no clear rules. But history warns us, when one empire rises and another refuses to fall, the space between them becomes the battlefield. The last time the world saw such a transition was before World War I, when Britain ruled the seas and Germany rose to challenge it. That war reshaped the world. This one, if it comes, may end it. China's silent advance is not aggression for its own sake. It is survival. It believes the world has already turned against it, that the West seeks to contain, weaken, and isolate it. And when a superpower feels cornered, it stops playing defense. It prepares to strike. For now, the confrontation remains economic and diplomatic. But the pressure is building around Taiwan, in the South China Sea, and in cyberspace. Every move, every sanction, every alliance adds another weight to the scale. And when that balance finally breaks, Asia will not be the only region that burns. The world will follow. The Middle East, the eternal battlefield. The Middle East has always been the center of conflict. Not because its people love war, but because its land holds what the world cannot live without: power, faith, and oil. It is the birthplace of civilization, of prophets, and of empire. And for centuries, every great power that rose on earth has fought to control it, or to control those who do. Today, the Middle East remains what it has always been: the world's fault line. Every crisis here ripples outward. Every explosion echoes in the halls of global power. And as the struggle between East and West intensifies, this region once again stands at the edge of the storm. The story begins, as it so often does, with borders drawn not by locals, but by outsiders. After World War I, European empires carved the Ottoman lands into artificial nations. Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. Lines drawn by foreign pens created decades of instability. Tribes were split, sects forced together, and governments built on promises that never belonged to them. The result was inevitable: endless conflict. But while the political map was chaotic, the resource map was clear. Beneath the desert lay oceans of oil, the black blood of modern civilization. Control the oil, and you control the world's future. From that moment, the Middle East ceased to belong to its people. It became a chessboard of empires. In the mid-20th century, the United States replaced Britain and France as the dominant power in the region. Oil deals with Saudi Arabia, military bases across the Gulf, and secret alliances ensured Western control. In exchange, America promised protection, not just from enemies, but from change itself. Dictators and monarchs stayed in power, as long as the oil kept flowing and the market stayed stable. But power built on fear never lasts. By the 1970s, resentment had spread through the Arab world. Revolutions erupted. Religious movements rose against corruption and foreign influence. And when the Iranian Revolution in 1979 overthrew the Shah, a key U.S. ally, it sent shockwaves through the entire world. Suddenly, the Middle East was divided not just by borders, but by ideology. Sunni versus Shia, Islamic revolution versus Western-backed order, independence versus dependence. From that divide came decades of wars: Iran-Iraq, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and the endless Israeli-Palestinian struggle. Each one different in cause, but all connected by one truth: foreign powers profiting from local suffering. The new century brought a new phase. The attacks of September 11th, 2001, changed everything. In the name of security, the United States launched wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The stated goals were democracy and freedom, but the results were chaos and division. Millions displaced, entire nations destroyed. And from that destruction, extremist movements like ISIS were born, monsters created by the vacuum left behind. But behind the chaos, global powers continued to play their games. Russia returned to the region, backing Syria's regime in exchange for influence and access to the Mediterranean. China entered quietly, offering infrastructure and investment instead of troops. Iran expanded its reach through proxy militias in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. The United States remained, but no longer as the unchallenged power it once was. The region fractured into layers of war: proxy wars, shadow wars, economic wars. Each superpower backs one side, while civilians pay the price. In Yemen, hunger is used as a weapon. In Gaza, destruction and despair have become a cycle generations can't escape. In Syria, the world's silence allowed an entire nation to be erased from the map of normal life. Yet beneath the ruins, the true struggle continues, not over religion, but over relevance. Who will control the Middle East in the new world order now forming? The United States, with its fading influence? Russia, with its alliances and airstrikes? China, with its money and patience? Or the regional powers, Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, each driven by fear, faith, and ambition? The recent normalization deals between Israel and Arab states may look like peace, but they are built on fragile calculations. They're not ending conflict, they're rearranging it. Because the deeper cause has never been resolved. Millions of people still live under occupation, poverty, and hopelessness. When injustice is left to rot, it eventually explodes. The Gaza conflict has shown the world once again that the Middle East is never truly stable. Every ceasefire is temporary. Every peace agreement is conditional. And every act of violence, from a drone strike to a protest, risks igniting something far larger. Today, the region is divided between two futures: one that seeks integration, trade, and cooperation, and another that sees revenge, resistance, and revolution as the only way forward. Both sides exist in the same space, separated by nothing more than time. The Middle East is not just a region on the map. It's a mirror, reflecting the world's greed, hypocrisy, and fear. And as global powers tighten their grip, this mirror cracks further. The danger is not only that the next world war could begin here, but that, in a way, it already has. Because every conflict here, from Syria to Gaza, from Yemen to Iran, is no longer local. Each one is connected to global power struggles, to rival economies, to military alliances. Every strike, every sanction, every rebellion now reverberates across continents. The Middle East has become the testing ground for the future of warfare. Hybrid wars fought with drones, disinformation, and ideology. And if history has taught us anything, it's that what begins in the deserts of the Middle East never stays there for long. The digital battlefield, the war you can't see. Wars are no longer fought only on land, sea, or air. They're fought in silence, on servers, satellites, and screens. You can't see the front lines, but you feel the effects every day. This is the digital battlefield, and it may be the most dangerous war humanity has ever entered, because no one is safe and no one can truly win. In the past, nations built armies to defend borders. Today, they build hackers, algorithms, and surveillance systems to control information. The weapons have changed, code instead of bullets, data instead of bombs. But the purpose is the same: power. Every major power on Earth is now engaged in cyber warfare. The United States, Russia, China, Israel, Iran, North Korea, all investing billions into the invisible arms race of the 21st century. Because in this war, one successful strike can cripple a nation without ever crossing its borders. It began quietly, with small hacks and leaks. In 2010, a computer worm called Stuxnet infiltrated Iran's nuclear facilities. It wasn't just a virus, it was a weapon. Engineered to destroy physical machines by digital means, it proved something terrifying. You can damage a country's infrastructure without firing a single shot. Since then, the attacks have evolved. Power grids shut down. Hospitals lose access to patient records. Banks are frozen. Governments spy on their own citizens in the name of security, while private corporations harvest the same data in the name of profit. And the line between protection and control has all but disappeared. The internet was supposed to unite humanity. Instead, it became the battlefield that divides it. Truth itself is now a weapon. Fake news, deep fakes, propaganda, each designed not just to mislead, but to exhaust the public's ability to tell what's real. When people stop believing in facts, they become easier to control. Social media has become the new front in psychological warfare. Platforms track every emotion, every word, every choice, and feed users exactly what keeps them outraged, distracted, or afraid. Governments exploit this. Corporations profit from it. And slowly, societies lose their ability to think freely. In this environment, information is no longer about knowledge. It's about manipulation. And whoever controls the flow of information controls reality itself. China's Great Firewall is one version of this control: absolute surveillance under the guise of national security. Western nations claim to defend freedom of speech, yet they too censor, filter, and shadow ban information that challenges their narratives. Different systems, same goal: control the narrative, control the people. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence is changing warfare entirely. Autonomous drones can now identify and eliminate targets without human command. Algorithms analyze troop movements faster than any general could. AI-generated propaganda floods social media in multiple languages simultaneously, shaping opinions before humans even realize they're being influenced. The battlefield has expanded to space. Satellites are now military assets, used to guide missiles, track movements, and gather intelligence. A single cyber attack on a nation's satellite system could disable its defenses, communication, and economy instantly. And nations know this, which is why Space Command divisions are being formed across the globe. But perhaps the most dangerous part of the digital war is that no one can prove who started it. When a city loses power or a stock market crashes, how do you know who's responsible? A hacker group? A government? A rogue actor? The anonymity of cyberspace gives every nation plausible deniability, and that makes escalation almost certain. Because when no one knows who attacked, everyone suspects everyone. This constant suspicion creates a new kind of fear, digital paranoia. Leaders make decisions based on what they think their enemies are planning, not what they know. That's how misunderstandings spiral into real-world conflict. We've already seen glimpses of it. During global crises, fake stories of attacks or invasions spread faster than officials can deny them. Public panic, market collapse, political chaos, all triggered by a few lines of code. In this sense, the next world war may begin not with an explosion, but with a notification. And it won't stop there. The rise of digital currencies means that money itself can now be controlled, tracked, or shut off with a keystroke. In a fully digital economy, rebellion becomes impossible because if you disobey, you can simply be erased from the system. No cash, no access, no existence. Technology was meant to free humanity, but it has become its cage. Every message you send, every purchase you make, every movement you take, all stored, analyzed, and used to predict what you'll do next. And those who own that data, whether governments or corporations, now hold the most powerful weapon of all, control over human behavior. The digital battlefield doesn't need bombs to destroy societies. It erodes trust, divides communities, and rewrites reality until people no longer know what to believe. And when truth collapses, democracy follows. This is the invisible front line of the modern era. A war without soldiers, fought in silence, with the outcome measured not in territory gained, but in minds controlled. And while the world focuses on physical wars, the real conquest is happening here. Online, unseen, and unstoppable. The silent alliances, new powers rising. Every major war in history has begun not just with enemies, but with alliances, agreements made in secret, promises whispered in corridors of power. Before the first shot is ever fired, the lines of loyalty are already drawn. And today, those lines are forming again, quietly, strategically, and dangerously. The world alliances are shifting faster than at any time since the Cold War. Old friends are turning uncertain, and old enemies are finding common ground, not out of trust, but out of necessity. Because in a world moving toward confrontation, survival depends on finding strength in numbers. When the Soviet Union fell, the United States stood unchallenged. NATO expanded eastward, the European Union grew stronger, and for a while, it seemed the world had entered an age of Western dominance. But that dominance bred complacency and resentment. While Western nations debated over policies and politics, new powers were quietly building alternatives. At the heart of this new alignment lies a group once dismissed as minor players. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. What began as an economic cooperation forum has evolved into something far greater, a potential counterweight to Western power. Together, these nations control vast portions of the world's population, resources, and production capacity. And as global tensions rise, BRICS is no longer just about trade. It's about resistance to the existing order. In recent years, new members have shown interest, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, and even Turkey. If they join, the bloc will control not just manufacturing, but also energy, the very lifeblood of the modern world. The West built its strength on oil priced in dollars. But now, these rising powers are exploring trade in local currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. It may seem technical, but the implications are enormous. If the dollar loses its dominance, the entire financial system the U.S. built after World War II begins to crumble. And this is what makes these alliances so powerful. They're not built through treaties or military pacts, but through economics and necessity. China provides investment. Russia provides energy. India provides manpower and technology. The others provide markets and materials. Together, they create a network strong enough to challenge the West without declaring war. Meanwhile, in the shadows, another alliance is forming, one less formal, but equally significant. Russia and China have drawn closer than ever before. Their relationship, once cautious, is now strategic. They share intelligence, conduct joint military exercises, and support each other diplomatically. To both nations, the United States is seen not as a competitor, but as a threat to their survival. Iran, long isolated by sanctions, now finds itself supported by both powers. Its drones and weapons appear on battlefields from Ukraine to the Middle East. Its oil, once banned, now finds new buyers in Asia. And through this cooperation, a new power axis begins to take shape, one that challenges the very foundation of Western control. Across the globe, other countries are quietly choosing sides. Turkey balances between NATO membership and cooperation with Russia. Saudi Arabia strengthens ties with China while still hosting American troops. African nations, long courted by Western aid, now welcome Chinese infrastructure and Russian security contracts. Each move seems independent, but together they represent a global realignment, the slow birth of a multipolar world. For nearly a century, the world has operated under a unipolar system, one superpower dictating the rules. But history has shown that such systems never last. Power always seeks balance, and when balance returns, it rarely arrives peacefully. Western governments call this a challenge to democracy. But for many nations, it's a return of dignity, the right to make their own choices without foreign interference. They see Western promises of freedom as hypocritical after decades of wars, sanctions, and exploitation. And so, the silent alliances grow, not because of shared ideology, but because of shared resentment. The danger of this moment is not the existence of these alliances, but the misunderstanding of them. The West still views them as weak partnerships, unstable, temporary, and divided by culture. But beneath those surface differences lies a shared motivation, the desire to end Western hegemony. That single purpose is enough to hold them together when the world begins to fracture. The signs are already visible. Military cooperation between Russia and China has intensified. Iran provides drones to Russia. North Korea sends weapons. China quietly supplies parts and technology. Each acts small on its own, but together they paint a clear picture. A new bloc is preparing for the next era of confrontation. And while the West debates policies and politics, these nations are preparing for something much larger, a post-American world. They are building new banking systems, new trade routes, new internet infrastructure, systems designed to function even if cut off in the U.S.-led networks. It's a quiet revolution, one that doesn't rely on bullets but on independence. When alliances like these form in the dark, the danger is not in their strength, but in their unpredictability. A single incident, a conflict in Ukraine, a crisis in Taiwan, or an attack in the Middle East, could trigger chain reactions between allies bound not by treaties, but by unspoken expectations. And once those expectations are tested, the world may find itself entangled in a conflict no one intended, but everyone contributed to. The alliances of the 21st century are not written on paper. They are built through economics, technology, and shared defiance. They are silent but growing. And history tells us that silent alliances rarely stay silent for long. The Western decline, cracks in the empire. Every empire in history believed it would last forever. The Romans thought their power was eternal. The British called their domain the empire on which the sun never sets. And today, the West, led by the United States, carries that same illusion. But history has a way of humbling those who forget its lessons. For decades, the Western world defined progress. Its technologies, its currencies, and its systems became the global standard. From Hollywood to Wall Street, the world consumed what the West produced. But what begins as influence often turns into dependency. And dependency always has a price. After the Second World War, the U.S. became not just a victor, but an architect of the modern world. Its military power, economic reach, and political influence built the framework we live in today, the United Nations, NATO, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. These institutions were created in the name of stability, but they also ensured that power always flowed in one direction, toward the West. For years, it worked, but empires rarely collapse from invasion. They decay from within. And now, the cracks are showing. The first crack appeared in trust. Western governments once claimed moral authority, the right to lead because of their values. But after decades of wars without victory, lies exposed by whistleblowers, and surveillance scandals that reached their own citizens, that moral foundation began to erode. When you claim to defend freedom but invade nations in its name, eventually, the world stops believing you. The second crack appeared in economics. For decades, the Western system relied on endless growth, fueled by cheap energy, global trade, and an unquestioned dominance of the dollar. But as industries moved overseas and inflation grew, ordinary citizens began to feel the consequences. Wages stagnated, debt skyrocketed, and the middle class, once the pride of Western civilization, began to vanish. When a system no longer serves the people who built it, it starts to rot from its core. The third crack appeared in unity. The West often presents itself as a single bloc, united, democratic, and strong. But beneath the surface lies deep division. Europe struggles under the weight of immigration, economic disparity, and political polarization. The United States faces internal chaos, racial tensions, culture wars, and a growing distrust of its own institutions. The very societies that once stood as models of stability now struggle to hold themselves together. And then came the wars: Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and now Ukraine. Each one promised freedom, democracy, and peace. Each one delivered instability, chaos, and death. The cost was not only measured in dollars or lives, but in credibility. The rest of the world began to see a pattern. That Western intervention often created more destruction than it solved. Meanwhile, the younger generation, in the West itself, began questioning everything their leaders stood for. They saw the hypocrisy in foreign policy, the inequality in their own economies, and the corruption in the institutions meant to protect them. The result? A growing disillusionment, not just abroad but at home. For the first time in modern history, the Western world faces decline from within. Its enemies don't need to invade, they just need to wait. Every year, internal division grows, trust erodes, and the sense of unity that once defined the West fades. But the most dangerous crack of all is arrogance. Empires often collapse because they refuse to see their own fragility. When leaders mistake fear for respect and dominance for stability, they blind themselves to the shifts happening beneath them. They underestimate their rivals, overestimate their strength, and ignore the warnings of history. The American empire, like all before it, faces a choice: to adapt or to fall. But adaptation requires humility, a quality rarely found in those who hold power too long. Europe, once proud and independent, now finds itself caught between two giants, America and China. Its economies depend on trade with the East, but its security depends on protection from the West. This tension leaves Europe weakened, uncertain, and divided, a fragile partner in a world growing more dangerous by the day. And as Western influence declines, the vacuum it leaves is quickly filled by others. China builds ports, roads, and digital infrastructure across Asia and Africa. Russia supplies weapons and energy. Even smaller nations, Turkey, Iran, and India, now project influence far beyond their borders. The center of gravity is shifting, and the West is no longer the sun, it is becoming the shadow. For decades, Western media has framed this as a threat to democracy. But to many nations, it's seen as balance returning to the world. After centuries of domination, they view this shift not as chaos, but as justice. And that is what truly marks the decline of empire. Not when it's defeated by force, but when the world stops believing in its ideals. Today, the West still holds the most advanced technology, the strongest armies, and the largest economies. But the soul of its power, belief, is fading. Its people are divided. Its allies are uncertain. Its enemies are patient. And patience in geopolitics is the deadliest weapon of all. Empires rarely realize they've fallen until years after the collapse. The buildings remain, the flags still wave, but the influence is gone. History doesn't announce the end. It simply moves on. And as the 21st century unfolds, the question is no longer whether the West will decline, but whether it already has. The endgame, a new world order or global collapse. When the dust settles and the last weapon falls silent, one question will define humanity's future. Did we destroy the world? Or did we just rebuild it under new rulers? Every major war in history has ended the same way. Not with peace, but with reconstruction. Empires collapse, new powers rise, and the map of the world is redrawn. World War I gave birth to the modern state system. World War II created the United Nations, the nuclear age, and the dominance of America. If World War III begins, it will end with something far greater than victory or defeat. It will end with control, total, global, digital control. The digital empire. The future battlefield will not be fought over land. It will be fought over data. Who controls information, money, and artificial intelligence will control humanity itself. Central bank digital currencies could replace cash, tracking every purchase and every person. AI systems will monitor communication, predict dissent, and reward compliance. And under the banner of global security, citizens may accept surveillance as safety. But safety has always been the most dangerous illusion of all. The powerful no longer need to conquer countries. They only need to own the code. Once your thoughts, choices, and fears can be analyzed and predicted, freedom becomes a story of the past. A beautiful myth told by those who still remember what it felt like to decide for themselves. The rise of the technocrats. As nations rebuild, power will shift from governments to corporate empires. Tech giants, defense contractors, and AI developers will become the real superpowers. They will decide what is true, what is legal, and what is profitable. And the line between democracy and dictatorship will blur beyond recognition. The new rulers will not wear uniforms or crowns. They will wear suits, algorithms, and smiles. In the aftermath of chaos, humanity will look for saviors. But saviors often come with contracts, not compassion. The new divide. The next world order may not be divided by borders, but by systems. A Western-led open world powered by corporations and surveillance capitalism. An Eastern-led closed world built on centralized control and digital obedience. And in between them, billions of people caught in the middle, struggling to survive under whoever holds the key to their food, money, and information. The wars of the future will not be fought with guns, but with restrictions, shutdowns, and disconnections. Entire populations could be silenced with a line of code. Entire economies could be erased with a digital switch. The hope that remains. Yet, even in the darkest moments of history, humanity has always found a way to resist. Every system built on fear eventually collapses under its own weight. Truth has a way of surviving. Not through governments or media, but through people who refuse to forget what freedom feels like. And maybe that's what the real war is about. Not nations, not borders, but the soul of humanity itself. Because in the end, the greatest weapon isn't nuclear, it's obedience. And the greatest act of resistance is simply to think for yourself. If you made it this far, remember this. The next world war might not begin with explosions. It might begin with silence. Silence when truth is censored. Silence when people stop asking why. The storm is coming. Maybe it's already here. But whether it destroys us or awakens us depends on one thing: what we choose to believe next. Until next time, stay aware, stay awake, and never stop searching for the dark truth.